My mom said to me, if you can't have a child, we should get a divorce. My husband responded calmly, fine, I understand, even though I'm currently pregnant. I'm Emily, a housewife in my 30s, living with my husband who works for a company. We first crossed paths while I was employed at a food-related company. Our conversations about business dealings were always pleasant, and I was charmed by his occasional smile. I mustered the courage to ask him out, but he turned me down, saying, sorry, I'm flattered, but I have a girlfriend. A month later, he approached me with a change of heart. I broke up with her. Will you go out with me? It turns out he had started noticing me after my confession. His ex-girlfriend, sensing something was amiss, had asked, did you fall for someone else? When he agreed with her suggestion to break up, they ended their relationship. I felt a pang of guilt for being the catalyst for their split, but he reassured me with a warm smile, saying, it wouldn't have lasted long anyway. Don't worry about it. His comfort eased my worries, and after 3 years of dating, we got married. When we decided to get married, he said, I'd like us to have children after we're married. Would you be willing to stay home and support me and our future kids? At that time, I was working at a demanding job and was eager for a change, so I agreed to become a stay-at-home wife. I was determined to support my husband and embrace this new role. The transition from a working woman to a housewife was challenging, but it was worth it for the joy of our newlywed life. Every day felt blissful, and the absence of any issues with my mother-in-law was a significant relief. Her house was only a 10-minute walk from our apartment. I initially worried about frequent visits and potential intrusiveness, but my fears proved unfounded. My in-laws were incredibly kind and supportive. Whenever I had a question, they made the effort to visit our home and explain things thoroughly. Despite our difficulties in starting a family, they were always understanding. My mother-in-law even told me, you're more precious to me than a grandchild. I've always wished for a daughter since our family only had men. Please let me continue to cherish you like my own daughter. I adored my mother-in-law and trusted my quiet but dependable father-in-law. However, this harmonious relationship only lasted through the first few years. Over time, my once kind in-laws underwent a noticeable shift. My father-in-law became increasingly reserved, while my mother-in-law's demeanor changed drastically. Perhaps it was her true nature all along. Her attitude towards me went from being exceptionally warm to overtly cold. She has become quite harsh, frequently visiting our home, especially when my husband isn't around, and constantly nagging me about when we'll finally have a child. It's your duty as a wife, she insists. This contrasts sharply with her previous attitude, where she once told me, children are gifts from heaven. They'll come in their own time, so don't rush. Now, she compares me to other families, adding pressure with remarks like, the lady next door just had a baby, and the one next to her is expecting. What about you? Despite her persistent pressure, it's been fruitless without my husband's involvement. He initially wanted children, but a year into our marriage, he lost interest. Even when I attempted to initiate intimacy, he would decline with excuses like, I'm too tired, maybe another time, or don't bother me while I'm gaming. Despite discussing my struggles with my mother-in-law, she remained unsympathetic and continued to pressure me for a grandchild, only adding to my stress each day. Overwhelmed by her demands, I confided in my husband about the increasing pressure to have a child. He agreed to try for a baby with me, saying, I don't think we need to rush. Despite our efforts, I didn't become pregnant. My mother-in-law continued to blame me, insisting, it's because you're not trying hard enough. My son is not at fault at all. I even wondered if her constant criticism was making it more difficult for me to conceive. Unable to handle the mounting pressure, we decided to seek fertility treatment. I hoped this would finally ease my worries, but another issue emerged: my husband's behavior. Since we began the treatment, he became distant and cold, retreating to his room to play games after work and ignoring me when I tried to talk. This was difficult enough, but his frustration with my spending on crafting materials and his increasing volatility added to my distress. Whenever I stood up for myself, he would snap, "Who do you think allows you to live this way? You're just a housewife," and continued his selfish behavior. Even though I had quit my job at his request, he refused to acknowledge or address my concerns. One day, I came home to find him playing games during his usual work hours. I asked, "Aren't you going to work?" He simply replied, "I quit." He had resigned from his job without informing me. Shocked, I asked why, but he only grew angry, snapping, "It's none of your business." I was appalled by his response, but there was nothing I could do about a job he had already left. Initially, I wasn't too worried about finances, thinking we could get by with unemployment benefits and our savings. However, stress quickly mounted as my husband showed no interest in finding a new job. After quitting, my husband began spending all his time at home. I wished he would get out more, but he preferred to stay indoors, only venturing out to buy cigarettes. Our time together has increased significantly since he stopped working. At first, this seemed like an opportunity for more closeness, but it quickly turned sour. Just like with my mother-in-law, the constant proximity to my husband, whose attitude has shifted from warm to cold, has led to frequent arguments. I've come to realize that even simple conversations with him are now stressful, and we've almost stopped talking altogether. I find myself questioning whether this kind of married life is worth continuing. I started to feel like I had reached my breaking point with this marriage and began searching for a way out. Fed up with his endless gaming, I confronted him. "You're not a child. Stop playing games all day and start looking for a job." He then mentioned, "By the way, my mom said if you can't have a child, we should get divorced." In that moment, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if my mother-in-law was indirectly helping me. I had just discovered that I was pregnant after a checkup that day, and I had planned to share the news with him that evening. However, deciding not to tell him right away seemed like the right choice. It allowed me to distance myself from both my mother-in-law and my husband. I handed him the divorce papers, which I had pre-filled and kept in a drawer. "Okay, I understand. Here are the divorce papers," I said. My husband, clearly unprepared for this turn of events, looked stunned and speechless as he saw the papers. His usual commanding demeanor vanished, replaced by a bewildered expression. He seemed at a loss for words but began filling out the documents, clearly feeling compelled to comply with his mother's wishes. As he completed the forms, he kept casting glances at me, still processing the shock. We agreed to discuss property division later, but there wasn't much to divide. Our assets were minimal, largely because my husband had a tendency to spend extravagantly on his hobbies. While he criticized my spending, he was far more reckless with his own money, frequently splurging on gaming and amusement arcades. He had always been bad with saving money, both before and after our marriage, so we had no significant assets to divide. When it became clear that there was no real property to split, I thought our discussion was finished. However, my husband insisted otherwise. He pointed to a bank statement and said, "Don't we still have our savings?" The statement showed a substantial amount of savings, which he suggested we divide. I explained, "This money is from before our marriage, so it isn't part of the property division." His face went pale, but he countered, "Fine, but this apartment should be included in the division, right? I lived here too." I had to deliver some difficult news. "Unfortunately, the apartment is in my name, so you have no claim to it. Additionally, I've already listed it for sale, so you'll need to move out soon. Please make arrangements to leave. It would be inconvenient for you to stay here," I said with a calm smile. I had been saving for a future home, anticipating that this apartment might eventually be too small. Saving money had always been a hobby of mine, and I had accumulated substantial savings before our marriage. Even as a regular employee, I was able to purchase the apartment with those savings. So I did have some assets. With the proceeds from the sale, I planned to build a new house in the city center. Of course, this property, being from before our marriage, was not subject to division. It seemed my husband was unaware of this detail. He apparently believed he would be entitled to half of my property, but that was not the case. When he realized he wouldn't receive any part of it, he was left stunned. The shock left him in a daze as we continued our discussion, but he struggled to recover his composure. With little left to discuss, the conversation wrapped up quickly, and we proceeded to submit the divorce papers to our lawyers. The divorce was finalized smoothly. A few months later, I moved back to my parents' home, and with their support, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. I named him Ambrose, inspired by the phrase, "A boys be ambitious." Now, I'm enjoying a fulfilling life with my parents and my cherished child. I haven't informed my ex-husband or his family about Ambrose. I'm certain that if I did, my former mother-in-law would come storming in, demanding, "Give me back my grandchild." As for my ex-husband, after being forced out of the apartment, he returned to his parents' home. He has become a recluse, unable to cope with the ease of our divorce. His behavior is so suspicious that he often gets stopped by the police when he ventures outside. It's a rather pitiable situation. I later discovered that his decision to quit his job stemmed from deteriorating work relationships. It turns out my ex-husband was disliked at his company for his constant bad-mouthing, particularly by his female colleagues, and eventually, everyone began to ignore him. Unable to bear the isolation, he abruptly resigned. Perhaps his true nature was evident even before our marriage, kind only to me, while hiding his true colors beneath a facade. 3 years later, I was working as the manager of a craft store. After becoming a regular customer at a local shop, the manager, Linda, approached me with an offer. I'm getting older and considering retirement. If you're interested, Emily, would you like to take over this store? Linda asked. At that time, my parents were actively helping with childcare, and I was looking for a new job. If I turned down the offer, the store would close, which would inconvenience many loyal customers. Weighing these factors, I decided to accept and take over the store. While attending to a regular customer today, I was surprised by an unexpected visit from my former mother-in-law and ex-husband. Wow, this is a lovely shop, my ex-husband remarked. Yeah, Mom, look at this fabric. It would look great on you, he added. Annoyed by their obvious flattery, I asked, what are you doing here? My former mother-in-law then demanded, give me back my grandson. It seemed she had somehow learned about my child's birth and wanted him as the heir to their family. You were already pregnant when I asked for the divorce. Why didn't you tell me? If I had known, I wouldn't have gone through with it, my ex-husband accused. That's exactly why I wanted a divorce. If you had known about the pregnancy, you would have done everything you could to prevent it. I shot back, glaring at him and my former mother-in-law. My former mother-in-law then demanded, so, are you going to give me back my grandchild or not? I want to live with him soon. You've had him for 3 years. Now it's my turn. Her entitlement was staggering. As I stood there, incredulous, my parents and Ambrose arrived, having been alerted by a regular customer. What's going on? Is there a problem? They asked, clearly concerned and ready to assist. Seeing Ambrose holding hands with my parents, my former mother-in-law tried to approach him, saying, oh, he's so cute. Just like my son when he was young. Look, I'm your grandma. I attempted to intervene, but it wasn't necessary. Ambrose, clinging to my mother, said firmly, this is my only grandma. Can you please leave now? My mother nodded and asked the former mother-in-law to leave, but she insisted, just give me the child. Meanwhile, my ex-husband, eager to forcibly take Ambrose from my parents, advanced. I moved in front of Ambrose to protect him, but being much smaller, I was easily pushed aside. Ambrose, be careful, I shouted. My ex-husband was just inches away from grabbing Ambrose when suddenly his body was lifted off the ground. Looking up, I saw my father, who had executed a precise shoulder throw. Unbeknownst to my ex-husband, my father was a police officer with advanced judo skills. Stunned and in pain, my ex-husband looked up at my father with a mixture of fear and disbelief. If you continue to harass my child or grandchild, I will take further action, my father warned, displaying his police badge. Seeing this, my former mother-in-law, now pale and shaken, quickly pulled my ex-husband away, and they fled. I don't know what happened to them after that, and honestly, I have no desire to find out. Several years later, inspired by my father, Ambrose set his sights on becoming a police officer. I want to be a police officer when I grow up so I can protect Mom too, he said with determination. He has been working hard in his studies to achieve this goal, and is now undefeated in judo among his peers, thanks to my father's training. I'm excited to see my son grow into a remarkable person.